empty seats up here, and we, with luck, will be joined by our colleagues in the course of the next half hour or so. But that said, look, first of all, we have a really tremendous story here, I think, at least the opportunity to tell a great story. It's about, after COP28, every country is committed to their net zero ambitions. You know, where are they? You know, what are the challenges they're finding? And also, you know, for some countries, it's about financing the transition. We all know what we've got to do, but how do we do it and how do we get the money to do that? So we're going to be exploring these themes. And so I've got a super panel. We have to my left, His Excellency Professor, and there are more titles to come, Deputy Prime Minister among others, Biman Chand Prasad from Fiji. In the middle here, I'm delighted that we also have Manuchehr Safarzoda. Forgive me, a very poor pronunciation, but he's our representative from Tajikistan. And absolutely last but not least, Frederik Wisselink, who is he's a special envoy from the Dutch government in the Netherlands, and I think possibly the only representative from Europe at the conference at the moment, which is a rather nice thing to have. So a really tremendous perspective around that question. So I think it's a wonderful place to start immediately to my left with you, Biman. We'd love to hear your perspective. You know, Fiji is in a very special situation geographically, you know, climate-wise as well. How you're thinking about your net zero emissions, where you are on that journey, and some of the challenges, opportunities you're taking and challenges you're finding. Please.
Well, thank you, Simon. Again, you know, it's a great pleasure to be here. I was part of this very important forum last year in Bangalore, and this year's theme, growth, collaboration and transition, is very timely and appropriate. And of course, for a country like Fiji, a very small island state, together with many others in the Pacific, we have very special challenges, and we feel part of the global agenda towards a transition to clean energy, and indeed the whole global goal of decarbonization of our economies is very relevant and important for small island states like Fiji. Small we may be, but in terms of our energy composition, 50% of our energy comes from renewable sources, particularly hydro anyway. And we have set a national agenda by 2030 to transition towards full renewable energy economy, transition to a clean energy economy. However, we believe that while we don't contribute to the emissions growth, the agenda, adaptation versus mitigation, is very important. For us, small island states, the capacity to transition to clean energy may or could be quite challenging. And that's something, Simon, we can talk about in your other questions. But all I want to say is that the need for adaptation financing for small island states is at a critical juncture. We don't have time to waste anymore. And I think what we have argued in international forums with our multilateral partners, development banks, is these small economies need adaptation financing in a way that will allow us to not only build a climate resilient infrastructure, but also transition into clean energy without disrupting the process of economic growth that is so badly needed in some of these small island states. So that's where we are, Simon, and I'm happy to add more later on. Thank you.
I'm just going to follow up on that quickly, because that very last point you made is a super tricky one for virtually we've heard it from India as well. It's in a similar, is a giant version of Fiji in its own way, isn't it? And so what you're saying, I think the subtext of what you're saying is you're not going to be able to move away from oil, imported oil, possibly imported coal anytime soon, much as you'd like to.
Well, as I said, we want to be part of the global goal towards decarbonization, transition to clean energy. But for us to do that, in fact, we are doing that in our own way, and we are getting some support from international financing organizations through concessional financing, and adopting strategies and innovations in technology to ensure that we constantly and consistently move towards renewable sources of energy. But as I said, the bigger challenge for us, in terms of climate change, the adverse impact of climate change. In fact, many of the Pacific Island countries actually face an existential threat already. And so building climate resilient infrastructure, which means you need more adaptation financing, is very important while we make the transition, because even if we make the transition to 100% renewable sources of energy, all the Pacific Island countries put together, we would be contributing a very, very minute fraction of the emissions globally. So while we recognize that, we want to send a very clear message. We want to be part of the global agenda. We want to support the global goal of decarbonization of our economies and transition to clean economies. So that's the agenda for Fiji and for many of the Pacific Island countries at the moment.
Thank you for those thoughts. So, Your Excellency Safarzoda, Tajikistan, probably our audience not all that familiar with Tajikistan, but we'd love to hear the characteristics of Tajikistan's consumption of energy, need for energy, and how you're progressing along the path to net zero, and what you're finding the challenges.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me say thanks to the government of India for inviting us to this very important event. And regarding the transition energy sector, let me inform you about our situation in Tajikistan. In Tajikistan, in energy sector, we are following 4 main indicators, which we call it Strategy 10, because this has come from our national development strategy. It is including 4 digit of 10. What does it mean? The first 10, it is until 2030, we should increase our generation by 10 gigawatts. The second 10 means we should diversify our generation from other sources, basically from the renewable sources. We call it non-hydro, basically solar and wind, by 10%. And increase our export to the region, basically to the Central Asia and the South Asia, by 10 billion kilowatt hour per year. And the fourth 10, it means the reduction of the losses in the sector by less than 10%. And we are now working on it, and we are now, government of the Republic of Tajikistan, working on the hydropower of Ragun with a capacity of 3,000 600 megawatt. It's the biggest hydropower in Central Asia. And also, we are now starting with our international consulting regard the preparation of the feasibility study for the new project for the 1,000 megawatts the hydropower also. And we are in process with our partner, basically with the Masdar, for the 500 megawatt solar power in the north part of Tajikistan. With the World Bank also we start with the like this such type of project, and we are planning to increase our capacity with the solar until 2030 by 1,500 megawatts solar power station in the north part of Tajikistan. And I think with the transition we are very close. We are very close because we have two thermal power plants which we use the natural gas and coal. It is a local coal, but it's very expensive. And we are thinking to increase our generation capacity with the other sources and use this clean energy and close the thermal power plant in the near future.
Very good. So the power sector is in great shape, and you've got a strategy, a plan to be even more emissions neutral in power, if you like. But what about the rest of the economy? Because you've got a transport sector, you have some heavy industry. How are you progressing along those lines? Are there any plans to decarbonize?
Regarding the decarbonization, during the last message to the Parliament from my President to the Parliament, it is our new goal for the decarbonization. Then by 2037, we should minimize our emission to the air, and Tajikistan should become the green country. It is our new goal, and now we are working because the last message of the President to the Parliament was in last December, and 28th of December, and now we are working on the preparation of the new strategy regarding the decarbonization.
It was a great story, isn't it? And it's a great platform to begin with that not many countries have, to have so much renewable and be able to build off that platform into so much hydro and build into solar and wind. Thank you for that, Your Excellency. Now, Frederik, come to you from the Netherlands, which Europe in some ways has led the decarbonization push. And Netherlands been very much a part of it. Where is the government in the Netherlands on its push towards net zero? What's prominent in your mind?
Okay, well, thank you for the question. And I'm jealous about the percentage of renewable energy in your country, Minister. 89%. It's well, it makes us jealous. But we are striving for climate neutrality in 2050. That's the aim of the Dutch government. And like every country, you have to look into your challenges and opportunities for decarbonization. And for the Netherlands, decarbonization, because we have a large industry, we're a dense populated country, we have a pretty shallow sea, so our biggest potential for decarbonization is offshore wind and the CCUS, carbon capture and storage, solar energy, and in the future to replace our gas addiction, so to say, green hydrogen. So that are the three main challenges for the Netherlands. And well, to come to offshore wind, I think this is a case where we have learned and improved ourselves, and now we can say we have a successful implementation of offshore wind on large scale, because our aim is to have 21 gigawatts installed offshore wind capacity in 2030. And we started in 2014 with nothing, and we didn't have a strategy, so it was not a success. So we came to an agreement with all stakeholders in the offshore wind sector, and then we come up with a plan, and we created the right incentives for offshore wind. And I would like to share the success of our approach. And one of the most important elements of our offshore wind strategy is that we gave, as government, clarity on the conditions for planning and building wind farms, including their location, the measures to protect nature, and the necessary permits. So de-risking was done by our government in 3 ways. The developers of offshore wind parks have the insight in the conditions for the permits. They know when the grid connection is available, and they may use all the data we have collected for them to design the wind farm. And this way we have succeeded to mitigate the risks for investors to the offshore wind farm developers. And by doing that, we brought a lead time for offshore wind parks from 10 years in 2014 to 3 to 4 years now. And it goes without any subsidy. Actually, the locations are being auctioned and the revenues goes to the government. And we are ready, if there are interested parties, to share our experience with our offshore wind policy. Thank you.
No, I think it's a really interesting point for our audience in India, which has got quite a big coastline and quite good breezes. It's still quite a fledgling industry, though, offshore wind. I think the Netherlands, UK, but it's faltered even in Northeast America at the moment. And I think there's a sort of a cost element here and how you get remunerated. So can you just expand a little bit on the subsidies? Because it isn't the cheapest form of renewables. And the last auctions that had in the UK got no bidders because the price wasn't high enough. So how is it working in the Netherlands, apart from the factors that you mentioned that smooth the pathway? How's it operating without subsidies?
Well,
and watch your microphone. If you could bring the microphone closer, it might help a little bit.
Okay. Oh, hopefully they heard the answer on the first question. But anyway, yes, it is getting more difficult, but still there are enough investors who want to participate and make bids for offshore wind locations in the Netherlands. And due to the high energy prices in Europe, especially high gas prices, renewable energy remains competitive. So there is no subsidy involved at this stage either. So we're quite happy with the way it goes now.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to come back to you, Biman, because we've touched there on. I'll come to financing itself later. You've already mentioned this, but and then I'll ask the same question of you, Manuchehr, is about how the public sector drives the plan forward. What can it do in terms of what are you doing in Fiji, for example, in terms of sticks and carrots to make this happen? And policy, I suppose. Yeah.
Thank you, Simon. I think that's a really good question, really good point, because given the challenges of financing some of these renewable energy projects itself, the private sector, the public-private partnership model can only work if the state, the government, has very clear policies wrapped up in good, transparent, accountable incentives. I think that can help. So what we have done in Fiji, particularly in terms of mobilizing our own domestic resources, mobilizing the incentives that might drive the investment from the private sector into these projects. For example, we're talking about green bonds, blue bonds. We tried with what we call blue bonds, and we offered a small 10 million US dollars, and what we found was it was actually oversubscribed. So there was much more interest from the private sector if they find that the government is actually leading the charge, providing a very clear agenda as part of their national development plan. So right now what we're doing in Fiji is, while we are formulating our 3-year, 5-year, 20-year national development plan, we're actually consulting, having dialogue with a wide range of stakeholders and trying to mainstream this whole idea of climate adaptation, mitigation, and looking at projects. So our own assessment of how we can build that public-private partnership and entice private sector to work with government starts with government having a very, very clear policy, a clear agenda, and we kind of follow it through from the global agenda. So, our active participation in forums like, COP28 we just had recently and those in the past, it fits in with the domestic, thinking. And there's quite a bit of public support generally when you talk about these issues for governments to drive this. So, yeah, I think it's a very good question, one which doesn't have very easy answers as well.
No, not easy answers. And no, I think you're right. The profile of Fiji and Barbados come to mind as very vocal, in vulnerable countries to this, and it cuts through the media very well compared with some of the blah, blah, blah we get from the developed world, you don't mind. Manuchehr, love to hear your thoughts about what the Tajikistan government, what it's doing to sort of drive through decarbonisation, through the economy. Is there a strong policy? Is it gathering momentum? Do you feel you're at the early stages or quite well advanced?
In the Republic of Tajikistan,
just watch the microphone. Yeah, it's quite quiet.
It's working. Yeah. In Tajikistan, through the government, the main the direction of the government of the Republic of Tajikistan in this regard, it attracts the investment from the partner or the share from the government for the modernization of our existing power station, because the main part of our hydropower plant was constructed during the Soviet period, and now currently they needed for the modernization. And the main part of the investment which the government attract from the donors, and some part of the investment from the budget, the state budget going for the modernization basically. But as I mentioned, we are now in process with the construction of the Ragon hydropower plant. The most part of this investment going for the Ragon, because for Ragon hydropower plant we need the $6.1 billion. For the other part of our energy sector, we need the investment. And now we are working on the reform of energy sector to make a transparency, to make a good market in energy sector and attract the investment from the private sector.
Very good. Thank you for that. Now, Frederik mentioned a number of elements about the Netherlands, and one thing I do remember in the past was that the Netherlands was the most gas-intensive economy, certainly in Europe, possibly the world. It was very dependent on its giant gas field that it had, and it's amazing to hear the transformation that's happening in the country. And one of the things that will interest our audience here is the policy on, or the strategy on green hydrogen, because I heard Mr. Modi yesterday talk about green hydrogen It's often something that's associated more with hot solar, high solar irradiance countries. So I think we'd be really interested to hear why Netherlands is so keen on green hydrogen.
Yes, we are. And indeed, I heard the words of Prime Minister Modi yesterday that India would like to become a net exporter of green hydrogen, which is very good news for the industry in Europe as well. I come to that later, but first on the need for hydrogen, because both molecules and electrons will play a paramount role in our future energy system. We cannot electrify the energy transition. It's not only about electrons. We need molecules for high temperature. We need molecules for our industry. And that's where hydrogen comes in, especially in the hard to abate sectors like, well, industry, of course, the petrochemical industry, but also the transport, maritime transport and road transport. And to say some numbers about the amount we need in Europe, only 30% of the demand of green hydrogen in the future, we are able to produce ourselves through electrolyzers from offshore wind and other forms of feedstock. But so we have to rely on imports from outside of Europe, and diversification of imports is key. So in Northwest Europe, where almost all the demand is for green hydrogen, all the industrial clusters in Europe are located around and in the Netherlands. And we have our gas infrastructure in place to transport green hydrogen. And we have the port of Rotterdam ready as entry point for green hydrogen in Europe. So we are building a so-called backbone for hydrogen to deliver and transport the green hydrogen to all the industrial clusters in Germany, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, and Northwest Europe. And, well, how do we get the green hydrogen to Europe? Well, we envisage several corridors towards Europe, towards Rotterdam, the port of Rotterdam, from the Middle East, from North America, from Australia, but also from India. So we're very keen at this stage, because we have to start now for imports in 15 years, to engage with the governments, with companies, to, well, in the end, to have the green hydrogen imports coming to Europe. And we are ready for it, and we are ready to discuss this further with all of you. Thank you.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question, because the Netherlands is really quite ambitious in its plans for decarbonisation, and we have seen around the world, not least where I come from in the UK, of politicians backtracking a little bit. And so, we know green hydrogen, quite expensive. We've not touched on carbon capture and storage. You don't need to do that as well. A lot of these new technologies you've got to be paid for somewhere. So I wonder, is the Dutch population embracing the concept? How's it going down?
I missed the last word.
Yeah, is the population, the electorate in the Netherlands embracing all these new concepts, which will cost them a bit of money ultimately?
Yes, it is all about well, the cost of the energy transition, of course, is an issue. But I do think that for a successful energy transition, you need 3 things. And the first one is clarity from the government, clarity about the goals you want to achieve. In our case, in the case of Europe, it is climate neutrality in 2050. So you have to set the goals and put the right policy framework in place. But secondly, more important, you have to involve all stakeholders, the municipalities, the provinces, the businesses, and knowledge institutes, and last but not least, the people. Because only the transition in our country, but in every country, I suppose, can only succeed if you involve and involve all people. Only by doing that you have a just transition. So leave no one behind. And you can do that to in subsidies and incentivize some of the technologies to promote energy efficiency, because energy you don't use, you don't have to produce, you don't have to pay for or import. So energy efficiency is definitely one of the pillars to bring the costs down.
And thank you for that. And one other point that is worth making is that we all probably recognize Fiji's vulnerability as a Pacific island, but the Netherlands is actually similarly vulnerable to global warming and rising sea level. I'm going to come to you in a second, but I wonder if you'd like to comment, Manuchehr, about the role of public bodies in pushing forward the agenda for decarbonisation and how well it's going down, how you're dealing with that in Tajikistan.
Yeah, it is, as I mentioned, this is where as a government we are close with the decarbonization, but the decarbonization is very important. Basically, for us, as I mentioned, as the territory of Tajikistan, the 93% of our territory is the mountains, and the main sources of our hydro resources glaciers. And we are doing our best to reduce the emission and to reduce the impact of the emission to our glaciers. This is our main goal, and as I mentioned, we are now in the stage of in the process with the preparation of our strategy regarding to achieve our target by 2037. We should achieve our targets to decrease the emission and to transfer Tajikistan to the green country.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to finish. This will be our last question because we're trying to get you back on time here after that gap. Now, Biman, we've mentioned the word finance at least once, and we all know that COP27 and then COP28 sort of kicked the can down the road a little bit in terms of finance, and we're all hoping in Azerbaijan that we deal with it. But we're still struggling to get the world to raise the 100 billion a year or so that it promised in COP26, and there's a belief in some quarters that actually the need for finance for want of a better word, the developing world might reach 4 trillion. I mean, the numbers vary a lot, but I mean that is an unbelievable sum of money. So I'm really interested in your perspective as to where we are in getting bodies like the World Bank to release money, whether there is any reality in the mindset of these institutions, the IMF and what have you, about how they're going to raise that, whether you think there is a deep pool of money that is going to be able to be tapped by countries like Fiji and others. Are you optimistic about that? Would love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you.
Are you switched on? Yeah, you are.
I think that's a really good question and a really important one as well. I mean, having attended the World Bank, IMF, Asian Development Bank meetings last year, I think there is now a clear recognition and perhaps acceptance than the debate science of climate change and its impact. I think that debate is settled. And so in many ways, I think it's settled. And so a lot of these international banks, our development partners, and also our developed country partners realize the fact that it is important to look at the global financial architecture. So when you look at the Asian Development Bank, for example, it's talking about becoming a climate bank. The World Bank has its own evolution roadmap, and essentially there has been a shift towards looking at better financing for adaptation rather than just a focus on mitigation. We can see the last COP28, the decision to set up the loss and damage fund. I think it's an important one, and there's been a significant amount of pledges. But what is critical, I think, going forward, Simon, is how quickly and efficiently and in a transparent and accountable way we can make those pledges come to reality, and also make sure that international multilateral banks such as the World Bank, ADB, and others, including the IMF, which looks at the physical side of what's happening in all the countries, have to make sure that those finances are available. Many of the developing countries, small island states like ours, we don't have the capacity. And right now, the modalities surrounding the accessibility, I think the pledge, the availability is one thing. How accessible those financing instruments or pools are for some of the countries such as those in the Pacific is going to make a big difference. And I think if that happens, it will bring the goals of industry, private sector, governments into a focus, and perhaps work towards a common goal of decarbonization and transition to clean energy. So, in short, my answer to that question is that I think we are moving in the right direction, and what I've seen in the last 1 year in terms of the discussions in these international organizations, I think there is a recognition that time is running out for many countries. And as I said before, many of the Pacific Island countries actually face an existential threat, and funding adaptation projects, building climate resilient infrastructure is important to make the transition, whether it's in a large or a small way, to clean energy and to decarbonizing the economy.
Well, I think that's a very good way to finish. Quite an optimistic tone, I'm glad to hear. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you to our panelists for answering these questions so well, and I think a nice round of applause would be fitting.